Cadrum's old butler inspected the cleanliness of the mansion while recalling his master's behavior from earlier. Somehow today his demeanor felt utterly unfamiliar. There was certainly supposed to be a family meeting this morning, yet his sudden return was unusual. Moreover, his attitude seemed as if he was hiding something. On top of that, just a moment ago, he had brought in one of the household's direct servants, someone the butler had seen only a few times before, and gave strict orders that no one was to enter the basement. This was something that had never happened in the decades he had served his master. Could it be? Just as his thoughts started drifting toward strange possibilities, the maid who had gone down to the basement with Cadrum earlier came back up, carrying a burlap sack. It was fairly large, but judging by how easily she lifted it, it didn't seem to contain anything particularly heavy. The butler's breath caught in his throat. Seeing her, he realized that his suspicions were correct. Unlike her previously immaculate appearance, her attire now seemed hastily put on, as if she had dressed in a rush. Even worse, some parts of her clothing were torn, as if they had been forcibly removed. Noticing the butler's gaze, the maid subtly adjusted her outfit with one hand while still holding the sack.
He said no one should come down to the basement for a while.
Ah, I understand.
Cadrum and his wife had always prided themselves on their strong marital bond, uncommon among nobles, and had never taken on concubines. But it seemed that ended today. Lamenting the collapse of the household's peace, the butler quickly averted his gaze from the maid. Because of this, he failed to notice that the burlap sack was roughly the size of a crouched person, and that the maid appeared slightly taller than she had been earlier. Not long after, on the road leading out of the district, a cart reeking of food waste rolled up to the checkpoint.
"You've worked hard. Here's my pass."
The checkpoint officer recoiled from the unbearable stench he could never get used to. He waved his hand in disgust.
"That smell. Just go through quickly."
Disguised as a cleaner, Turan bowed slightly and pulled the cart past the checkpoint. How many days had it been since he had been trapped inside the demon realm, surrounded by walls and barriers? He let out a slow, relieved breath as the oppressive atmosphere of the enclosed space lifted from his shoulders. Entering a nearby alley, he opened the lid at the front of the cart and pulled out Rito, who was stuffed inside the burlap sack. She was tightly bound in chains, beaten to unconsciousness, and now looked no different from an ordinary person. That was easier than I expected. His plan had worked smoothly, disguising himself as Cadrum to lure and capture Rito, then transforming into Rito to leave the mansion, finally stuffing her into a garbage cart and passing through the checkpoint unnoticed. Thinking back on the past few days, practicing transformations, secretly acquiring a cart, stealing clothes, and forging an entry pass, Turan almost felt a sense of anticlimax. He had even absorbed a small amount of magic power from the illusionist bloodline, in case an overzealous checkpoint officer decided to inspect the cart. Regardless, since everything had gone smoothly, that was all that mattered. After changing into the white robes commonly worn by House Aravian's nobles, Turan slung Rito over his shoulder and took off into the sky. It was not unusual for wizards to be seen flying in this area, so no one paid him any attention. After flying west for about 20 minutes, Turan reached the outskirts of Morgan City and pulled out a strand of red hair to cast tracking magic, determining his direction. Before long he spotted Myza, his ally, leisurely flying over a sparsely populated hill, accompanied by 3 nobles from House Aravion. Using wind magic, Turan sent his voice through the currents.
"Everything went as planned, Myza."
Of course, there was no way the nobles of House Aravion, adept at reading wind currents, would fail to notice this. One of the 3 nobles looked around sharply.
What was that? Did that guy just send a message through the wind?
A second noble asked.
Do we know him?
The third peered toward Turan.
I've never seen him before. He does look a bit like Dex.
Even though House Aravion was a great noble house with a considerable number of members, their total count was only around 100 or so. And since they lived far longer than ordinary people, they could usually recognize all of their kin. The only ones whose faces were relatively unknown were the elders who rarely engaged in external affairs. The reason they did not immediately suspect him was that his face resembled that of the young knight he had previously disguised as, only aged up. Since his features were a blend of several House Aravian nobles, they found him oddly familiar and assumed he must be an unknown relative. Just as their vague suspicion was about to turn into full-fledged doubt, an enormous surge of electricity erupted from behind them. Caught off guard by Myza's sudden assault, the 3 nobles of House Aravian were incinerated into charred corpses before they could even scream. Looking down at the dead bodies, Myza muttered as if making an excuse.
They were all his underlings.
"Well done. Let's move immediately."
If they had been nobles from the younger faction, The two might have only incapacitated them, or tried persuading them to misdirect the pursuit. But since they belonged to the older faction, killing them outright was the cleanest option. Having eliminated any traces of pursuit, Turan and Myza immediately flew south at full speed. The flying speed of nobles at the heir-apparent level of a great house was several times faster than an ordinary noble's running speed. As a result, they reached Zavalin City, the territory of House Burke, within just a couple of hours. Instead of entering the city directly, Turan and Myza landed in a secluded valley nearby. Focusing his consciousness on the soul bond, it was not long before a golden eagle descended.
BJ.
Perhaps it was the joy of reuniting with his soul-bound companion. After so long, BJ chirped loudly, untied the rope binding the swing between its legs, and flew straight into Turan's arms. The bird rubbed itself affectionately against him before landing on the ground, where it began writing a lengthy message expressing how much she had missed him, and scolding him for taking so long to return, practically composing an epic poem. Feeling guilty for leaving her alone for so long, Turan simply nodded along, responding with gentle affirmations. Watching this, Myza chuckled softly from behind. Just then, a man stepped down from the swing BJ had carried and approached Turan.
You sure took your sweet time, man.
The man, Solif, one of Turan's allies, spoke in a grumbling tone. He had gray hair tied in a ponytail and wore the typical attire of a traveler. From a distance, one could easily mistake him for Turan. However, up close it was evident they were not the same. He was shorter, had a more robust build, and his face bore no real resemblance to Turan's. Solif tossed his gray wig aside.
Do you know how many days I've been flying around here on this thing?
I figured you'd enjoy it, considering how much you always wanted to ride it.
That was fun for the first day or two.
During the past several days, when Turan had infiltrated the Aravion main house, Solif had been flying around Zavalin City in disguise, wearing a wig and similar clothes to Turan. This was to prepare for the possibility that Turan would be suspected as the one who had helped Myza escape. Within the Burke household, Solif had avoided contact with others thanks to Ashiz's cooperation, while publicly showing himself outside to maintain the illusion that he had never left the Burke territory.
Well, anyway, this must be the Aravion lady. I'm Solif. Nice to meet you.
I've heard a lot about you. I'm Myza.
Myza had reached out to shake Solif's hand, but the moment their hands met, his wrist detached and fell off. She cried out in shock. Solif burst into laughter at the success of his prosthetic hand prank.
Gotcha.
Don't tell me you've been putting off fixing that, just to pull this prank.
Do you think I'm an idiot? The healing process has been slow since I started treatment a while ago. But look, I've regrown everything up to my wrist.
As he said, Solif's right arm, which had once been severed above the elbow, had now regenerated down to the wrist. It seemed the healer girl Ashiz had brought in was diligently doing her job. Ignoring Myza's bewildered gaze, Turan lowered Rito, whom he had been carrying over his shoulder, onto the ground.
Well then, let's unwrap our gift.
Soon Myza would have to ride BJ and fly far away, beyond the reach of House Aravion. Before that, they needed to interrogate Rito, extract any useful information, and dispose of her. As Rito crawled out of the burlap sack, her once neat appearance was now barely recognizable. Having been repeatedly punched during her capture, her nose and cheekbones were broken, both eyes and lips were swollen, and several of her teeth were missing. When a bucket of water was thrown over her, she regained consciousness and quickly rolled her eyes around to assess her surroundings. Spotting the only familiar face, she desperately bowed her head toward Myza.
Lady, please spare me. I don't know what I did wrong, but please, I beg for your forgiveness.
Her pitiful whimpering, muffled by her broken nose, was enough to make even other species reconsider eating her out of sheer sympathy. However, Myza only looked down at Rito with cold, sharpened hatred in her eyes.
Did you enjoy it?
What?
Killing my family. Did you have fun?
At those words, Rito, who had been trembling, suddenly froze. As if her previous demeanor had been an act, she lifted her head, clicked her tongue, and let out a deep sigh.
Ah, so you found out? I figured a day like this would come eventually.
Before she could finish, Myza struck her with a bolt of electricity. Rito's words cut off in a scream. The power of the attack wasn't enough to kill even an ordinary person. But after being chained up for so long, Rito was no different from an ordinary person now.
Keep talking.
I'm not sure what you want me to say. Maybe how much blood your mother and little brother coughed up back then.
Even after being electrocuted, Rito still had the gall to mock them. If nothing else, her courage was commendable. Seeing Myza about to lash out with electricity again, Turan quickly intervened.
Wait.
You're
too worked up,
Turan said.
Take a deep breath and calm yourself. I'll handle the interrogation for now.
At his words, Misa finally realized she had nearly lost control and killed Reto in a blind rage. That couldn't happen. This woman needed to suffer several times more than her family had before she died. As Misa stepped back and closed her eyes to steady herself, Turan briefly explained the situation to Solif, who was watching in confusion, that this woman was a noble of the Zahar bloodline who had assassinated Misa's parents and had been working for House Aravion.
A Zahar assassin working for Aravion?
Solif said.
Why the hell would she do that?
We're about to find out.
Turan replied.
Do you know anything about torture?
Wouldn't say I'm an expert. What about you?
I've never done it before, but I could if necessary.
Hearing their exchange, Rito suddenly let out a chuckle.
You two sound like clueless kids. Listen up, brats. I don't know what that girl promised you, but you'd better let me go now. Otherwise you're going to regret ever being born. Do you really think you can run from Aravion forever?
Even in complete captivity, Rito's face was filled with venomous defiance. However, Turan could smell the thick stench of fear and despair emanating from her. Her bravado was nothing more than a thin shell, one that would crumble with the slightest push.
Rather than that, why don't you tell me something?
Turan said.
How did you get Cadram on your side? I never expected an ambush in that place. If you tell me, I'll give you some information in return. How about it?
Reto's lip curled.
I'm the one asking the questions. You just admitted you don't know how to torture someone. Beating, burning, and cutting aren't the only ways to inflict pain. Torture won't work, so you might as well.
Perhaps her outburst was an attempt to ignore her own inner panic, but Reto, who had been passionately taunting them, suddenly stopped speaking. Turan, sensing something was off, looked up to see her swollen eyes wide open, staring at his face in shock.
Kareem?
Who's that?
Turan asked. Rito gasped and quickly shut her mouth. However, he had already caught the scent of her rising confusion and distress. Of course, unlike him, Rito wouldn't be able to smell anything from Turan. Her broken nose was likely filled with the overwhelming stench of blood.
Answer me. Who is Kareem?
Who are your parents?
Reto fired back.
No, which noble bloodline do you belong to?
From her counter-question, Turan realized that she had once again seen traces of someone else in his face. After a brief moment of thought, he spontaneously came up with a lie.
Talus Zahar.
What?
You must have heard of him.
Back in the port city of Komad in the Enril Desert, the city's lord had remarked that Turan bore a resemblance to Talus, the second in command of House Zahar. If Reto had been raised solely as a wizard under House Aravion, she might not recognize Talus's face. But if that wasn't the case, Reto studied him carefully.
Now that you mention it, you do look a lot like him. Even your eye color is the same. There's no way he got married again, so are you an illegitimate child?
Had she seen him using a transformation mask, she would have assumed that even this face was fabricated. But her only memory was of being suddenly beaten by Cadram before waking up here. Who could possibly imagine the existence of a relic that allowed someone to change their face at will? Moreover, in the midst of all this, Reto had unconsciously revealed an important piece of information. She wasn't born and raised under House Aravion. She was a noble from House Zahar. Without revealing his realization, Turan continued questioning her.
As I said, I'm the one asking the questions. Who is Kareem?
Reto gave him a confused look and answered.
He's Lord Talus's son, isn't he? If what you're saying is true, that would make him your half-brother, though. Well, I suppose you wouldn't know since he died in the war.
The moment he heard those words, the scattered pieces of information in Turan's mind connected into a single picture. From what he had learned in Kalamoth, the man presumed to be his father was a young noble. Talus, the second in command of a great house and the direct younger brother of its head, wouldn't have been considered young. If both Talus and his son bore a resemblance to Turan, then logically, Talus was likely his grandfather, and Karim was most probably his father. More importantly,
He's dead?
hearing that the man he assumed to be his father had already died, Turan felt a mix of disappointment and relief. The disappointment came from knowing he would never be able to meet the man who had brought him into this world. The relief came from the implication that, at least circumstantially, his father hadn't betrayed his mother.
Yeah, that's right. But listen, if you really are Lord Talus's son, then hurry up and untie me. I was only here because of orders from higher up. You must know how terrifying your father is, don't you?
Was it because she had found a glimmer of hope in what had seemed like a completely hopeless situation? Rito, who had been maintaining her arrogance just moments ago, now displayed an urgent and pitiful desperation. Meanwhile, Turan's expression hardened at her words. She had come here under the orders of the higher-ups. That meant that, despite the war between their factions and their ongoing hostility, the upper ranks of the two great houses had been secretly working together behind the scenes.
All right, if you answer my questions honestly, I'll let you meet Talus Nim. Who gave you orders, And in what manner? Whose instructions did you follow in House Aravion?
No, wait a moment. Did you not understand? I'm telling you, this is the will of those above. Do you dare to interrogate me?
Answer the question.
Seeing that Turan ignored her warning, Rito gritted her teeth and glanced around. The same venomous glare as before flickered in her eyes.
Talisnim, let me see Talisnim. In front of him, I can say everything.
Turan reached out and covered Reto's mouth, pinching her forearm lightly with his other hand. A piece of flesh was torn away, and a horrifying scream erupted from behind his obstructing hand.
I'll ask again. In House Sahar.
You crazy son of a bitch.
Instead of reacting to the insult, Turan covered her mouth once more and tore another piece of flesh from her arm. At the sight, not only Solif, a noble traveling with Turan, but even Mesa, a successor of a great house who had been glaring with hatred just moments ago, turned deathly pale. Both of them, as successors of great houses, had experienced battle and taken lives before, however. It was their first time witnessing someone so thoroughly torment a defenseless person. Unlike the two, Turan did not feel even the slightest emotional disturbance despite torturing someone for the first time in his life. To him, Rito was nothing more than a henchwoman of those old shepherds, an evildoer who had manipulated innocent lives. The moment he labeled his target as an enemy, a wolf beyond the fence, there was no hesitation in his actions. Of course, unless she were a wizard, Rito, now no different from an ordinary human, could not endure such brutal torture for long. Before long, she was on the verge of passing out from pain and blood loss, but Turan would not allow even that escape. The healing magic artifact of Varaha. It was inefficient for a high-ranking noble's body, but when 3 top-class nobles poured their magic power into it, they could compensate for the inefficiency. Despite her desperate resistance, Turan forcibly fed the medicine into Reto's mouth, healed her, and then broke her again. How many times had he repeated this process? Unable to bear the sight any longer, Solif was the first to excuse himself, saying he would stand watch outside. Even someone who had slaughtered hundreds of pirates without flinching found the scene too revolting to endure. As the background noise of BJ, the golden eagle, hopping around on the dirt ground continued, Turan steadily refined his torture skills on Rito. With his keen sense of smell and ability to learn, he analyzed the scent of pain emanating from his victim, determining which areas to stimulate and how for maximum agony. At last, even Misa, who had merely watched from behind, looked utterly drained. Then, with hollow eyes, Rito muttered,
I'll talk. No, I'll talk. Please, please stop. Just kill me instead.
Compared to the dramatic sobbing and pleading she had done when she first came to her senses, her voice was eerily quiet. Turan brought his nose close to her neck and took a deep breath. Amid the thick scent of blood, he could smell fear, despair, and resignation. According to the confession of the half-broken Rito, the one who had directly dispatched her to House Aravion was Rahman, one of House Sahar's successor candidates and the cousin of the head of the house. The order was to faithfully carry out the directives given by 6 high-ranking figures in House Aravion, including Cadram Aravion. Since it was a secret mission, no one in House Sahar knew about it except for Rahman, and on the Aravian side, only those 6 individuals and their direct subordinates were aware of Reto's true identity. Surprisingly, the head of House Aravion was not among those 6, and Rito herself did not know whether he was aware of this internal collusion. Even those 6 who knew her identity treated her strictly as a mere maid in the presence of the head, and the head himself showed no particular regard for her.
Have you ever searched the head's residence? With your concealment abilities, it wouldn't have been difficult.
I never bothered. I figured knowing unnecessary things would only put me in danger.
Reto admitted that she had simply carried out the missions assigned to her like a machine, without ever trying to investigate those giving her orders in any depth. To Turan, this level of passivity was absurd, but in reality the world was full of such people. After confirming that she wasn't lying about only performing her assigned duties in the head's residence, he shifted the topic back to the head himself.
What kind of person was he?
He just seemed like an old man, so exhausted that he had no interest in the affairs of the world.
Hearing this, Misa unconsciously nodded beside him. It seemed she had perceived a similar impression from her own father. Had the head been secretly pulling all the strings while pretending not to know anything? Or was he truly just an indifferent absolute ruler? Given Misa's background, the former was more likely, but the latter couldn't be completely ruled out. As he ran through various hypotheses in his mind, Turan next asked how Rito had managed to operate as a spy for so many years without being exposed. After all, if a maid never aged, it would naturally raise suspicions that she was a wizard. However, the solution to this issue was so absurdly simple that it was almost laughable. When she first infiltrated 15 years ago, she pretended to be 20 years old. After that, she gradually changed her makeup techniques to make herself appear older.
And they actually believed that.
Yes.
Turan splashed water onto Rito's face, which was a mess of tears and blood, to wash away her makeup. Sure enough, whereas she had previously looked to be in her early to mid-30s, her bare face now appeared to be in her mid-20s. To be able to alter her face without a magic artifact, one could only call it a magical technique in itself. Momentarily impressed by this revelation, Turan quickly returned to questioning her about the crimes she had carried out. Though these were already implied in the documents of the middle-aged noble faction, hearing the details directly from the perpetrator was an entirely different matter. As he pointed out various passages from the documents and had her annotate them one by one, the topic shifted to Maze's family.
Those two, no, to be precise, those three, I poisoned them. When they went on an outing near the city, I secretly laced their...
Poison?
Turan frowned at the unexpected revelation. It was common knowledge that poison was ineffective against wizards, especially nobles. For a knight, it might be possible to die if they consumed enough poison to kill hundreds of ordinary people. But for nobles, even drinking poison until their stomach burst would only result in mild diarrhea at most, unless, of course, one possessed the bloodline ability of those long-extinct night hunters, who were known to wield poisons.
Yes, I don't know where it came from, but it was incredibly potent. Even though she was weak, she was still a noblewoman, yet it was strong enough to kill her, and it even put Misa, who had already accumulated considerable strength, in danger.
Turan furrowed his brows at the revelation that Misa had also been poisoned. It seemed highly likely that this was the direct cause of her eating disorder. What he couldn't understand was how they had dared to administer poison to her, someone who should have possessed the body of a divine being. No matter how weak she had been, this was a deadly poison strong enough to kill Misa's noble mother. They must have either known for certain that it wouldn't be fatal or simply not cared whether she died or was severely injured.
You're sure you don't know where the poison came from?
Yes.
Turan persistently repeated the question, watching for any signs of hesitation, but he didn't get the impression that she was lying. After verifying a few more details about her crimes, he finally ran out of things to ask.
Then it looks like we've extracted everything we can. Mesa, if you want revenge, I'll step aside for you.
No, that's enough.
Surprisingly, Misa's face showed little hatred toward Rito as she responded.
She already looks like nothing more than an empty shell. And I don't think I could inflict pain as effectively as you did.
Had watching Turan's torture already satisfied her desire for vengeance? Misa raised her hand, gathered a small amount of electricity, and struck Rito down, ending her life. A moment later, with Solif now returned, the three of them and the Golden Eagle absorbed the magic power from her corpse and sent her soul into oblivion. After erasing all remaining traces, an awkward silence lingered before Solif spoke up.
That torture, it didn't bother you?
Not really. It was something that had to be done,
Turan replied. Solif opened his mouth as if to say something, then simply shook his head.
They say desert nobles are ruthless. I guess that wasn't a lie. Well, whatever. Being cruel to enemies is a necessary trait. As long as you're good to your own people, that's what matters.
The way he muttered it sounded less like he was speaking to someone else and more like he was trying to convince himself. Truthfully, Turan was well aware that his personality wasn't exactly normal. Ordinary people couldn't become this emotionally detached just by labeling someone as an enemy. It was the same reason why, when Kiorn had once praised him as a good person, he had internally thought otherwise. After roughly finishing up, Turan turned to Mesa, who still had a slightly dazed expression.
Looks like it's time for us to part ways.
It seems so.
Unlike Mesa, who was fleeing far away, Turan and Solif planned to return to the Burke estate. They needed to distribute the documents they had obtained to various vassal houses, stirring public outrage and preventing those in power from exerting undue pressure. And in the worst-case scenario, if things went completely south, they had to at least ensure the Burke family could escape.
Before you leave, we should arrange a food supply. It'll be a while before we meet again.
Misa looked slightly embarrassed at that and glanced over at Solif.
Food supply?
As I mentioned before, Misa has difficulty consuming food properly, so we need to help her.
How?
Instead of answering immediately, Turan cast a brief look at Misa. He considered that the process, knocking her out, inserting a tube into her throat, and feeding her directly, might be humiliating for her.
Can I explain, Mesa? If I'm not around later, you might have to ask him for help.
Misa let out a small groan before nodding. After explaining the process of sedating her and inserting a tube to directly feed her stomach, Solif gaped in shock.
I take back what I said earlier. You're a fucking lunatic.
After ensuring her last meal supply, Mesa flew south, riding a sling attached to BJ's body. Her destination was the hot spring region of the Siraf wetland. If she could establish a friendly relationship with the great Monkey King Aikul under BJ's mediation, there would be no one in the area who would dare touch her. Besides, Rita, who frequented the region, wasn't particularly aggressive, so there was little risk of conflict. After secretly returning to the Burke estate, Turan reported everything that had happened to Ashish, one of the Burke household. Ashish, as if struggling to withstand the pressure, sank deep into his chair and shook his head vigorously.
You actually went through with it, so now it's just a battle of nerve and resolve, huh?
That's right.
In a matter of days at the shortest, or a few weeks at most, House Aravion would come to learn that an unknown benefactor had helped Misa escape. Turan was certain that, among the potential suspects for this act, he would rank somewhere around third or fourth. The first to third suspects would likely be Rito or other Zahar nobles. What he needed to do now was to ensure that he was not identified as the benefactor, while also protecting House Burke from facing unjust pressure. In other words, it was a kind of show of force. With the power Turan currently possessed, this was more than achievable. But considering the necessity of maintaining the illusion that he was of the Barrier Master bloodline, it wouldn't be an entirely easy task.
Can we withstand this?
It's entirely possible.
He had already ensured that the corruption of Aravion nobles was anonymously leaked to various vassal houses through couriers. If all of them were in a state of fury, would House Aravion dare to impose excessive penalties on House Burke or attempt to destroy them? Unless the head of House Aravion personally led an invasion, such an attempt would be utterly impossible. And considering they lacked definitive proof that Turan was the perpetrator, it would be a reckless move to take action against him. Several days passed, yet surprisingly the nobles of House Aravion did not make a move, not even by the time Solif's hand had completely healed. Meanwhile, through BJ, who had returned, they confirmed that Mesa had safely arrived at the Hot Spring region. During this period, Turan also became acquainted with Rua, the woman of the healer bloodline who had been treating Solif. After learning that Turan was the financial backer covering Solif's medical expenses, Rua proposed several plans to support the lives of commoners, to which Turan readily provided funding. Not only was he pleased to see a shepherd tending to the flock well, but this was also a way to keep Solif's treatment under wraps. About a week later, the effects of the corruption documents he had secretly sent to each house began to surface. Several vassal houses, enraged, sent a proposal to gather and march together to Morgan City in protest. Naturally, House Burke was included, as Turan had also sent an anonymous letter to Medela, the head of the house. When the head heard that both Turan and Solif would be joining, she was visibly pleased. In a situation where a show of force was necessary, having Turan along with Solif, the wandering noble, even just as additional numbers held significance. To prepare for any unforeseen circumstances, only Haram and Ashiz's father remained at the house, while the rest of the Burke family, accompanied by dozens of knights, set out for Morgan City. By the time they arrived, more than a dozen noble houses had already gathered. The number of nobles alone was in the dozens, while the number of knights reached the hundreds, an overwhelming force. The sight of them brought to mind the past Dark Elf subjugation force. The head of House Burke is here as well. Of course, I still cannot believe Misa was forced to live in such a state. Just what were they thinking? Medela, the head of House Burke and Misa's grandaunt, was seething with anger, just the right presence to set the atmosphere ablaze. As everyone awaited an official response from House Aravion, dozens of Aravian nobles approached via the main street of Morgan City. Turan's expression hardened as he sensed a familiar presence among them, prompting Solif to whisper beside him.
What is it?
He's here.
Badal Aravion, the head of House Aravion. Upon hearing this, Solif clicked his tongue.
If that bastard targets us here, we're all dead, aren't we?
No way.
Trying to abduct and interrogate Turan without a shred of evidence? That would be equivalent to House Aravion throwing away the entire power structure it had maintained until now. Regardless of what the head, the upper echelons, or even the gods were thinking, as long as they intended to preserve the existing order, such an action was impossible. However, if the head of House Aravion disregarded all of that and attacked him, at least once, he should be able to hold him off and escape. If he were to face the head of the house one-on-one, there was a high likelihood that he would be killed instantly. However, here, there were dozens of nobles gathered, starting with Solif. No matter how transcendentally powerful one might be, when faced with such numbers, some level of resistance was inevitable. If he could withstand the initial attack and blend in with those fleeing, then escape on BJ, not even the head of House Aravion would be able to pursue him. BJ's speed was far beyond what any human using wind magic for flight could ever hope to match. Even with that assurance, Turan felt a cold sweat trickling down his back from the sheer tension. No matter how certain he was of his ability to escape, it was natural to feel anxious and afraid when a predator capable of tearing him apart was right before him. At that moment, Badal Aravion opened his aged lips and began to speak.
My brothers, I regret that we have gathered under such unfortunate circumstances.
Just as before, his voice carried clearly across hundreds of meters, amplified by wind magic. As the gathered heads of houses listened, Turan subtly inched closer from behind, heightening his sensitivity to the sacred relic as much as possible, attempting to glimpse the head's emblem. The closer he got, the more the initially faint symbol began to take clearer shape. A cloud infused with lightning, a symbol unique to House Aravion, and beneath it a tightly clenched fist. 3 symbols shone brightly. The plains, which had been noisy due to the words of Badal, the head of House Aravion, fell silent in an instant. No matter how angry they were, it was difficult to raise their voices recklessly in front of that powerful wizard.
Regarding this matter,
Badal announced,
I will entrust all authority to Lyn Aravion, my dear cousin, and the hero who led the Battle of Dekhan to victory in the past. Please consider his words as my own.
After saying that, Badal closed his eyes and took a few steps back like an old man whose strength had been drained. Even though he had personally come forward in such an important situation, no one among his vassals dared to protest against his decision to appoint a proxy. If the head of the house stepped forward directly, they would only be intimidated during the conversation. This way, it was more advantageous. More than anything, Badal's face, as he stepped back, looked genuinely exhausted. A moment later, Lyn, the elder of House Aravion, whom Badal had just introduced, stepped forward to take his place.
Now, everyone, listen.
Lyn began.
The document in question this time is...
To their utter dismay, it was claimed that a noble from House Sahar had infiltrated the main residence not long ago, stolen several confidential documents, and even forged them. Except for the fact that the noble in question did not actually belong to House Sahar, the claim was fairly close to the truth. However, such a story was not convincing to the vassal houses.
Since when has the stronghold of House Aravion been so lax?
One voice demanded.
What about the Wall of Light? Doesn't the information in the documents match exactly with my younger brother's death?
Another shot back.
We have already captured and interrogated someone who witnessed the magical beast on our side. Forgery? What nonsense! Stop talking nonsense.
Unlike the head of the house, the elder seemed easier to challenge, and so the heads of the vassal houses raised their voices in succession, refuting the claims. Taking advantage of the commotion, Turan called to Ashiz, who stood beside him.
Ashiz.
What is it?
That person over there, do you know what bloodline they belong to?
Turan pointed toward a robust middle-aged woman standing among the young nobles of the Frost bloodline. The reason he singled her out was because the emblem within her body was the same clenched fist shape he had just seen from Badal.
She's probably someone who married into that house, like Uncle Haram,
Ashiz said.
I think she's specialized in close combat.
Can you find out for sure?
Is it important?
Very.
Wait just a moment.
Without asking further, Ashiz immediately approached them and started a conversation. The nobles of the Frost bloodline, who had been in the middle of a serious discussion, showed signs of annoyance at the unexpected interruption. However, it did not take long before they were swayed by Ashiz's sociability, their expression softening into smiles. It took less than 3 minutes for him to return with an answer.
She's from the fighter bloodline,
Ashiz reported.
But why does that matter all of a sudden?
Turan was about to answer, but then glanced at Badal, who was standing a little distance away, and closed his mouth. The bloodline ability of House Aravion was merely reading the flow of the wind, not enhanced hearing. However, somehow he had an uneasy feeling that a person of Badal's caliber might be able to control all the wind around them and listen in on conversations.
This place is too open. I'll tell you later.
When we get back.
Yeah.
Soothing Ashiz with that, Turan recalled the bloodline of Badal that he had just observed, a storm cloud mixed with lightning and a clenched fist, symbols representing the storm bloodline. In other words, Badal possessed not just one, but 3 bloodline abilities: wind, lightning, and strength. But Badal's parents were nobles from House Aravion and House Carmine. Of course, the genealogy Turan had seen in the library did not specify the bloodlines of Badal's grandparents. It was possible that a latent trait had surfaced after several generations. However, Turan instinctively suspected that this fighter bloodline was the result of some artificial manipulation. After all, both Solif and Mesa had only possessed 2 bloodlines. Perhaps the mental processing work they did was a necessary condition for granting new bloodline abilities. As Turan remained deep in thought, a sharp voice suddenly rang out from behind. It was Medela, the head of House Burke.
I have no desire to speak further,
Medela declared.
Lady Mysa, those who tormented my niece must be appropriately punished. Just how cruelly did you treat her for the heir of a great house to flee from her own family?
At her outburst, Solif, who was standing nearby, flinched while others immediately chimed in.
Indeed.
The documents detailing the corruption of the Aravion nobles were filled with records of the vassal houses gathered here, specifically those that had not aligned with them, being subjected to various disadvantages. However, the most substantial portion of the documents concerned the harassment of Mysa. It was customary for matters within a house to be handled internally, but wasn't this going too far? Moreover, a significant number of the people here were distant relatives of Medela, meaning they were also related to Mysa by blood. From the beginning, ensuring the safety of the next head of a great house was a matter of great importance to the vassal houses. At this, Elder Lin hesitated for a moment before bringing up something unexpected.
The document states that Mysa, that is, Lady Mysa, fled on her own. However, that is not the truth. Lady Mysa was kidnapped while taking a walk outside the city by those damned Zahars.
What did you just say? What nonsense is this now? Are you saying that House Aravion is full of idiots who failed to notice dozens of Zahar nobles invading? Or what? Are you claiming that the head of House Zahar personally set foot in the Taking Plains?
At the last remark, the gathered nobles instinctively turned their gazes toward Badal Aravion. If the Zahars, those murderers from the Enril Desert, had truly come, then they would need the power of a mighty head of house to stand against them. However, instead of speaking, Badal simply closed his wrinkled eyes in silence. Sensing the growing tension, the elder cleared his throat loudly to draw attention before speaking.
We are currently investigating who was responsible for the abduction. But if all of you continue to distrust us and remain divided like this, the matter cannot be properly resolved. Please cooperate. If House Aravion stands united, how could those filthy desert hounds dare to target the descendants of the Thunderlord?
It seemed that the main house of Aravion had decided to shift the blame for this incident onto the nobles of House Zahar. After all, there was no better way to mend internal fractures than by emphasizing an external enemy. Besides, given that there were already connections between some within Aravion and House Zahar, even in the worst-case scenario, they could simply stage a controlled conflict to make it seem credible.
Could this really all be a scheme of the Zahars? If it is, isn't that an even bigger problem? That would mean House Aravion was completely unable to respond to their schemes. Now that you mention it, that's true.
However, there was something the elder had not anticipated. The vassal houses were interpreting his claim as proof of Aravion's loss of leadership. Ordinarily, no one would dare say such things in front of a powerful head of house. But now, with him aged and feeble, the situation was different. As murmurs of discontent spread, a flicker of realization crossed the elder's face.
Now, wait a moment.
Step back for a moment, Lin.
The elder, who had been about to speak further, quickly withdrew at the command of a low, aged voice. Badal, who had until now remained still, with his eyes closed, had stepped forward. As the old head of house took the lead once more, the members of the vassal houses ceased their protests and turned to face him.
As I stated earlier, it appears that the nobles of House Zahar were involved in this incident. However, some of the disadvantages suffered by the vassals are undoubtedly the responsibility of our own kin. Thus, I will form an investigative group that will include some among you to look into this matter.
Even without using wind magic as he had before, Badal's voice carried much more strength and clarity than before, reaching even those standing at a considerable distance. And that was not the only change. As the once clear sky gathered clouds and thunder rumbled in the distance, a display of power unfolded, one reminiscent of the time when the Dark Elf subjugation force had been dispatched. The vassals, witnessing a mere fragment of that overwhelming power, hesitated before nodding in agreement.
If the head of the house is willing to concede that much, that would be acceptable.
Had he simply wielded his power to threaten them outright, their pride would not have allowed them to yield. However, Badal, while demonstrating his strength, had also extended his proposal in a way that respected them, leaving them an avenue to retreat. As a result, though the vassals still looked somewhat reluctant, they could not openly oppose him any further.
Hey, is this really okay?
Solif murmured to Turan, stealing a glance at him.
The atmosphere feels off.
but Turan could not answer. That was because he had perceived the changes occurring within Badal, changes that differed from his previous weary demeanor. The moment Badal stepped forward and wielded his magic, something new emerged between the scattered storm clouds and the clenched fist. A hammer and an anvil, the very symbol of the enchanter bloodline, the same one associated with House Burke. The clenched fist lifted the hammer high, and then brought it crashing down onto the anvil. As it struck, the lightning and wind that erupted from the impact swirled violently within Badal. Turan immediately grasped the significance of this, the Thunder Lord, a wielder of a great hammer who commanded the storm and lightning. What was occurring within Badal's body at that moment was a manifestation of the very figure that House Aravian revered as their progenitor, the mighty Priya god known as the Thunder Lord. After showcasing his power once, Badal once again withdrew, resuming the appearance of a frail old man. The vassal assembly then continued discussions with the elders for several more hours before finally reaching a compromise. As originally promised, Cadram and the other middle-aged nobles would be temporarily stripped of their power, and a thorough investigation would be conducted, including members from the vassal houses. Furthermore, they secured an agreement that no one would suffer any repercussions under the pretext of the recent gathering and display of force. To Turan, this was likely the most realistic outcome. House Aravion was not about to be completely overturned, but at the very least, with the middle-aged faction partially weakened and the vassals' demands met, House Burke no longer faced an immediate threat. However, the faces of the Burke nobles upon their return to Zavlin were far from bright. After all, their relative and the next heir of House Aravion, Myza, was missing, whether she had run away or been abducted. On top of that, they had directly confronted their ruling house. Even if an agreement had been reached to overlook the matter, it was still an unpleasant situation to have fallen out of favor with their superiors. Upon returning to House Burke, Turan did not discuss the Thunder Lord with Solif and Ashis. Having witnessed someone truly wielding divine power, he was reluctant to speak of it so openly, even in a relatively safe location. Fortunately, both of them understood when he promised to explain once they were in a more secure setting. A few days later, just as expected, House Aravion's investigative team came looking for Turan.
You are Turan, the wandering noble of the Barrier Master bloodline, correct?
Yes.
One of Mesa's few external friends. A person who had coincidentally been near the area just weeks before the incident, and had even sent her a letter. On top of that, someone highly skilled in magic and possessing considerable magical power. Looking at these facts alone, he was undeniably a suspicious individual. Officially, the matter had been attributed to a scheme by House Zahar, so the extent of their suspicion was merely whether he had been a collaborator. Of course, their investigation soon hit an unexpected roadblock.
He was flying through the sky on a swing pulled by a golden eagle.
Yes, I saw it myself.
And just a week ago, too?
That's right.
The city's residents had testified about Solif's actions while he was pretending to be Turan, and even the household servants of the Burke family consistently claimed they had seen Turan every day. This was thanks to Ashiz spreading the story in advance. Of course, if they had resorted to torture, a few people might have broken and confessed. But House Aravian was hardly in a position to attempt such a thing. The investigation team had even assessed how strong and fast Turan's golden eagle, BJ, was, however. The clever BJ deliberately acted weak, displaying less than a tenth of her usual strength in front of them.
BJ, faster.
Turan called out, seated on the swing.
Fly as fast as you can.
Even as he sharply reprimanded her, BJ let out strained noises and struggled to fly, barely managing to stay aloft. Seeing this, the investigation team had no choice but to conclude that the golden eagle was not particularly useful for escaping. No matter how intelligent a magical beast might be compared to ordinary animals, it was difficult for them to imagine that BJ was deliberately ignoring commands as part of a prearranged deception with her master. Only after Turan also verified his identity as a noble of the Barrier Master bloodline did the investigation team finally acknowledge his innocence and withdraw. Through this process, he realized one more thing. As expected, their connection with the Zahars wasn't as strong as he had thought. If the middle-aged faction of House Aravion had truly maintained deep ties with House Zahar, at least one of them should have recognized Turan's face, or been reminded of his father or grandfather upon seeing his portrait. The fact that they hadn't meant that they either lacked access to the faces of Zahar nobles, or even if they had met them, it wasn't frequent enough for them to recognize them. Ideally, Turan would have liked to infiltrate their main estate again to conduct further reconnaissance, but doing so a second time would be difficult. Given his last stunt, they would now be aware of the existence of magic artifacts capable of forging false faces and voices. After staying for another month, Turan finally informed Medela of his intention to leave House Burke. Considering that he had initially used meeting Misa as an excuse to stay, his departure was actually overdue. Medela, however, expressed her gratitude. She knew that Turan had remained to increase the family's numbers, helping them endure House Aravian's pressure.
Well then, shall we go?
I swear, I never want to ride this damned swing again.
Solif grumbled, sore from days of non-stop riding. With Solif's complaints trailing behind them, Turan departed from House Burke in the dead of night, seated on the swing. By now, BJ could fly at such an altitude that they would appear as mere specks from the ground, ensuring that their movements could not be tracked. Passing over the taken plains, they traveled through the reforested lands being rebuilt by pioneers, then crossed the wasteland, eventually reaching the Siraf wetlands. Even though the swing had been reinforced and was now heavier than before, they managed to reach the hot spring region in just 3 or 4 days of flight.
Turan?
It's been a while, Mesa.
After 2 months apart, Misa, the young noblewoman Turan had pulled from House Aravion, was now looking after a baby monkey. However, her face and body had not gained much weight, suggesting that she had struggled to feed herself properly. Considering how quickly she had regained weight when food was directly pushed into her stomach, there was no way she would be in this state if she had been eating even a little properly.
Has life here been all right?
Yes, Akul has been treating me well.
Aikul, the Monkey King who ruled over the hot spring region, let out a loud grunt through his nostrils at her words. Unlike his rough demeanor toward Turan in the past, he was surprisingly gentle with Mesa. It almost made Turan suspect that Aikul simply had a preference for women.
What are you glaring at, you bastard?
Yet, judging by the way Aikul showed clear displeasure toward Solif, that suspicion only grew stronger. After exchanging brief pleasantries, Misa's expression turned slightly anxious as she asked,
How is House Burke and my aunt?
She had likely spent the past month here worrying most about their safety. Turan and Solif, as high-ranking nobles, had no trouble taking care of themselves. However, Misa and her family were relatively weaker and had many things to protect. The reason she had never complained about the harassment she endured was out of fear that House Burke would be crushed under the power of House Aravion. Understanding this, Turan carefully explained to Misa everything that had happened in the taken plains after she left.
So, for the time being, things should be safe. At least as long as the external tension with House Zahar remains.
That's a relief.
Hearing his explanation, a bright smile spread across Misa's face. She had likely been deeply anxious during her time here, practically confined to the hot spring region with no news from the outside. Just as Turan nodded in agreement, she suddenly pulled him into a hug. Although she had gained some weight since before, her frame was still so thin that he could barely feel any weight.
I was so overwhelmed last time,
she said, her voice quieter now.
But after coming here, I realized I never got the chance to say this. Truly, truly thank you for pulling me out of that hell.
Turan hesitated, unsure of how to respond before simply patting her back a few times. After releasing their embrace, the three maintained an awkward silence for a moment before deciding to first relieve the fatigue of their long journey. While Mesa, one of Turan's traveling companions, took care of BJ, the magical beast, Turan soaked in the hot spring with Solif, their third companion.
Oh, this is amazing. It would be even better if it were just a little hotter.
The place they were in was the hottest spring in the area, the same one Turan had entered with Rita in the past, but even that did not seem to satisfy Solif. Well, after all, one of the 2 bloodlines latent in his body granted him the power to handle fire. Just as Turan was born with exceptional senses of smell and agility, Solif had the ability to perceive various types of light and possessed resistance to heat, though as seen from how the nobles of House Varaha were injured in the explosion, it was not at an absolute level. As Turan quietly closed his eyes and enjoyed the heat, Solif spoke in a low voice beside him.
Hey, Turan.
What?
That girl is completely into you, isn't she?
What are you talking about all of a sudden?
Solif pressed on.
You could tell just from her behavior earlier. Honestly, if I were a woman, I'd have fallen for a man who overturned an entire noble house to save me too.
That's not the case.
Based on his past experiences, when people felt what was commonly called love, their bodies emitted a scent similar to that of a beast in heat. However, Turan had never once caught such a scent from Misa. Even during their embrace earlier, all he had sensed was a mix of joy and sorrow, a rather complex set of emotions. Oblivious to this, Solif smirked knowingly.
Come on, don't be so stiff. You took a risk for her because you're interested in her, didn't you?
When I saved you, I also risked getting on House Varaha's bad side. Don't tell me you think I did that because I was interested in you?
No, that's not the same thing.
Solif clicked his tongue and soon changed the subject.
At the very least, speak more casually. The three of us have similar statuses, skills, and even ages. Yet you two keep using honorifics with each other. It makes me the only one who feels awkward.
If nothing else, saying our ages are similar is a bit shameless.
Turan was 19, Mesa was 22, whereas Solif was 58, nearly 3 times their age. Of course, considering that high-ranking nobles lived close to 300 or 400 years, the difference was not so great that they could not be considered the same generation. Hearing Turan's reasonable argument, Solif immediately burst out in frustration.
If you're going to treat me like an old man, at least show me some respect as an elder.
After finishing their bath, the two dried themselves, got dressed, and parted ways to take care of their respective tasks. As Solif was about to leave, Turan gave him one last warning.
I already told you. But don't ever hunt the monkeys here. They're all Ikul's family.
I got it. If I see any monkeys in danger, I'll even rescue them, so don't worry.
Solif waved his hand confidently and walked off. Turan activated his senses, then set off to find Misa. While Solif went to hunt impressive game for their meal, Turan planned to administer the nourishment in advance. After all, it seemed like Misa felt embarrassed showing the process to others. Before long, Turan arrived at Misa's location and came across an unexpected sight, making him stop in his tracks. She was sitting with BJ on her lap, carefully massaging the base of her wings.
How about here? Does this feel good?
BJ chirped and stretched out one leg, scratching words into the ground. She appeared to be writing things like, feels good, and a little more to the right. Since BJ's facial muscles were not as developed as a human's, she could not make rich expressions, but her half-lidded eyes were enough to tell just how much she was enjoying it. After massaging for a few more minutes, Misa lightly patted BJ's wings and stood up.
All right, that's enough.
BJ scratched a new message into the dirt. Do more.
I'll do it later, or ask Ikul to do it.
BJ stamped her feet and scrawled again. He's too dumb to do it. He's too strong and his fingers are too thick. She stomped as if urging Misa to read every word. She usually did not act this petulantly, unless Turan was not around, which meant she had grown even closer to Misa. Well, just like Turan, Misa was also someone who matched with BJ. Judging by the goodwill BJ had shown Turan when they first met, it was clear that there was a special bond between magical beasts and the humans connected to them by bloodline. Turan watched their close interaction with satisfaction, but soon a thought crossed his mind. If Misa were to inherit his soul contract, would she be able to use wind magic? Of course, he had absolutely no intention of abandoning BJ, but there was no guarantee that such a situation would never arise. For example, if he found a magical beast that matched with the Zahar bloodline but his soul lacked the capacity to accommodate both, or if he were to die unexpectedly. Lost in these hypothetical thoughts for a moment, Turan snapped back to reality as he saw Misa successfully pacify the whining BJ and send her off to Ikul.
You're done with your bath. I see.
Misa greeted him.
Ah, yes.
After answering, Turan recalled his conversation with Solif and spoke up.
Let's start speaking casually with each other from now on. We're comrades. I already speak informally with Solif anyway.
When he had begun speaking casually with Ashiz, it had not felt this awkward, but suggesting the same to Misa somehow did.
Huh? Okay, Turan.
Ignoring the awkwardness, Turan moved straight to the main topic.
Solif will be preparing dinner soon, but I think it'd be best to administer the nourishment beforehand. You haven't eaten anything since we left, have you?
Yeah, I tried, but it still doesn't work well.
Turan could see the self-reproach on her face as she spoke. He could guess it was likely anger at her own weakness for not being able to overcome the trauma. Instead of immediately telling her to begin the nourishment process, Turan placed a hand on her shoulder and spoke calmly.
I don't know how you feel. I've never experienced the suffering of being unable to eat. But Rito is dead, and as long as I'm here, no noble from House Zahar can sneak up on you.
From the interrogation of Rito, Turan had been able to roughly deduce the reason behind Misa's eating disorder. It must have been the lingering memory of suffering from poison, having ingested it along with her mother and younger brother when they were assassinated. Turan wanted to reassure her that the one who had poisoned them was already dead, and that even if someone tried something similar again, he would be there to stop it. However, instead of expressing gratitude, Mesa let out a faint groan and shook her head.
Actually, it's not because I'm afraid of being poisoned.
Then what is it?
Turan asked instinctively, though he half expected her not to answer. Mesa had always been reluctant to talk about that day, but perhaps because the shift to casual speech had slightly closed the emotional distance between them, she hesitated for a moment before blurting out.
I feel so cowardly.
Turan did not ask why she thought of herself that way. Instead, he remained silent, instinctively sensing that she would explain on her own. As expected, Mesa soon began to recount what had happened in the past. 10 years ago, 3 people had gone on a picnic to a scenic hill near Morgan City. However, while they were eating their packed meal, a sudden stomachache struck, and her younger brother, who had not yet awakened his magic power, was the first to deteriorate. What saved him was Mesa's magic artifact for healing, which she possessed despite her young age, and the fact that she was already considered an heir. Though it did not have the ability to remove poison, making it as futile as pouring water into a bottomless jar, it could at least keep him from dying immediately, even as blood poured from his body. The problem was that, in the meantime, both her mother, who had magical power at the level of a low-ranking noble, and Mesa herself were also succumbing to the poison, as her mother and younger brother begged her in agony to save them. All Mesa could do was shed tears of blood and alternate the use of the healing artifact to temporarily delay their deaths. To make matters worse, the knights who were supposed to be stationed nearby for their protection had all disappeared, leaving Mesa unable to call for help. Her mother and brother continued crying out for their lives while shedding tears of blood. The unbearable pain of poisoning burned through her entire body. Her magic power was gradually drying up.
In the end, I used the little remaining magic power to heal myself. I was scared. I was afraid that if I kept treating them, I would die too. If I had just pushed myself a little harder, I might have been able to save them all.
Mesa lowered her head as if she were a sinner, her reddish-brown hair falling over her face. Hearing her full story, Turan realized that he had completely misunderstood the cause of her eating disorder. The wound embedded in her heart was not fear of death, it was the guilt of having survived after abandoning her family. What was the right thing to say here? Turan ran through various responses in his head, but in the end he simply spoke his honest thoughts without calculation.
I don't know if my words will comfort you, but you didn't do anything wrong. No one can demand a 12-year-old child to sacrifice herself to save her family. No one has the right to blame you. Not even the family members who were lost.
After all, it was also at the age of 12 that Turan had lost his mother and fought a war with his village. When he thought about how young and easily frightened he had been at that time, he could never bring himself to call her actions cowardly. Hearing this, Mesa buried her face deeper into her hair and began to sob. After a brief moment of comfort, Mesa gathered her courage and tried eating a piece of bread, only to vomit it back up. As before, she eventually passed out and had the nourishment administered while unconscious. Later, after a meal of roasted rabbit prepared by Solif, Turan gathered his comrades and proposed they analyze the current situation and discuss their next course of action. The first topic that came up was the 4 symbols embedded in the body of Badal, the head of House Aravion, which they had seen in Morgan City.
4 bloodline abilities.
The words hung in the air. Turan broke the silence.
It's probably wind, lightning, physical strength, and enchantment magic.
Then, does that mean the Thunder Lord resides within the body of the head of House Aravion? Wait, hold on.
Solif glanced at Misa.
I don't know much about that god, but wasn't the Thunder Lord a man?
That's right. I mean, yeah, he was.
Then that means he was planning to switch to a female body later? Just imagining myself as a woman is horrifying, but damn, that's impressive. In more ways than one.
Well, after living for so long, maybe that kind of thing doesn't matter anymore. It's not like House Aravion has never had a female head before. Or maybe it's not actually the Thunderlord himself.
Turan's hypothesis made both of them widen their eyes. Solif leaned forward.
What do you mean, not himself?
I mean, the body he's inhabiting is of Aravion blood, so he can use the Thunderlord's abilities to some extent. But the soul itself might belong to a different god entirely. The ancestor of the Enchanter bloodline is actually a more famous deity, after all.
The lame goddess,
Misa said quietly. The name of the god who created Orum's library, the old Empire roads, and various other relics. Turan nodded.
It's also suspicious that the 4th bloodline, which was added just as he started making his move, turned out to be the enchanter bloodline. Maybe the head of the family's consciousness is usually in control, but whenever he uses his power, the god's consciousness takes over. The way he felt when he was in the background and when he stepped forward was completely different.
Well, yeah, he did seem like a completely different person. Wait, hold on. So that means a woman was inhabiting a man's body?
Solif trailed off into muttering, turning the question over, wondering aloud whether it was stranger for the god inside the head of House Aravian to be male or female. Turan knocked lightly on a rock to draw attention back to the discussion and concluded.
At least there's one fortunate thing. He can't wield his power freely. If he could, he wouldn't have needed to send a proxy in the first place.
This meant that even if the three of them could not reach Badal's level of strength, as long as they could hold their ground adequately, they had a chance of winning. At that moment, Mysa turned to Solif.
The ancestor of House Varaha was the Silver Sun, right?
Yeah. So what 4 bloodlines do you think they have?
We might be able to guess, based on scriptures and legends.
At Mysa's suggestion, Solif hummed in thought before something came to him.
For this side as well, one of the 4 is probably a bloodline related to close combat. There are plenty of stories about warriors wielding swords of light to massacre goblins.
Goblins were an eastern race known for their sharp, shark-like teeth and infamous for their fondness for eating children. Of course, in modern times, like many other non-human species, they had been pushed to the wilderness by humans and were now nothing more than a dwindling tribe in remote areas.
I wish I could go back and ask about it, or at least dig through the family's archives.
Of course, if Solif were to truly return to House Varaha, as he suggested, it would immediately turn into a war. Turan, struck by a sudden thought, looked at Mysa.
Maybe you also have the enchanter bloodline latent within you.
Me?
I originally only had 2 as well.
It was possible that Mysa's potential was even greater than Turan's, and that when she reached her limits, a 3rd bloodline could awaken. If that happened, she might be able to stand against Badal. Turan also considered the possibility that Solif might have similar latent qualities. When he mentioned this, Mysa and Solif each looked at themselves, and then at each other before tilting their heads in uncertainty.
A 3rd bloodline ability. Do we really have something like that?
Mysa murmured. Solif raised an eyebrow.
Is there any way to find out?
There is one. We could go to Orem's library.
At Turan's words, Solif, having heard about the place before, nodded slightly.
Oh, the one in the west.
It's not too far from here either.
Even if the 2 of them could not communicate with the librarian directly, Turan could act as a mediator, which should at least allow them to determine their bloodlines. Of course, whether the librarian would agree to help was something they would have to find out upon arrival. And so the group set their first goal, verifying Mysa and Solif's bloodlines at Orem's library. However, they did not leave immediately, deciding it was best to wait until Mysa's health had improved further. With each day of proper nourishment, her body visibly regained its former state, and in time she would become unrecognizable from before. Eventually, even if she walked the world openly, House Aravian would struggle to recognize her. They were looking for a skeletal, emaciated woman, and once Mysa had fully recovered, no one would associate her with her former self. In the following days, they spent time exchanging various magical techniques passed down in their respective houses. Starting with the thought acceleration magic that Mysa taught Turan, Solif also shared several visions of House Varaha. However, since Turan had already mastered most of them through their joint training sessions, there was little left for him to learn. If anything, he might end up taking on the role of instructor whenever the other 2 were too busy to teach.
So, you do it like this.
Solif's jaw tightened.
Damn it, it's not working.
One thing Turan did discover in the process was that, unfortunately, Solif's aptitude for magic was slightly inferior to that of Turan or Mysa. Of course, even that was only in comparison to them. By the standards of ordinary wizards, he was still a prodigy. While Solif grew frustrated at failing to immediately succeed with the magic Mysa had taught, Turan calmly demonstrated it again in front of him.
I'll show you again, so try to follow. Like this.
Turan went still. He had sensed 2 presences coming from the base of the mountain. One of them, judging by her body shape and the amount of magic power she possessed, was undoubtedly Rita, a noble of House Lavitas. Given that this place was a frequent hot spring retreat for her, her arrival was not all that surprising. In fact, Turan had found it more unusual that she had not visited for the past few months. From what she had casually mentioned in their past conversations, she usually stopped by at least once every few months. What truly startled him was the noble accompanying her, someone with magic power 2 to 2.5 times that of Mesa, a monster possessing an immense amount of magic, though still not quite on the level of Badal, the head of House Aravion. Seeing the tension visibly stiffen Turan's expression, Solif looked at him curiously.
What's wrong?
It looks like we have an important guest.
There was only one person who could wield such overwhelming magic and be visiting alongside Rita. The head of the prestigious House Lavitas was coming to this place. Upon hearing that the head of House Lavitas was coming, the two of them also looked down the mountain with tense expressions, just as Turan had earlier. It was Mesa, one of Turan's traveling companions, who spoke first.
If it's the head of a great noble house, could it be?
I don't know. I don't think so. But
the only answer Turan could give to the suspicion that some god might have possessed the person was that. Considering that Rita had been actively searching for the whereabouts of the White Elves, it seemed that their house did not have the ability to manipulate souls. However, the possibility that they had used other methods had to be taken into account. Upon hearing this, Solif, Turan's other companion, muttered with a hint of dread.
Should we run?
We haven't done anything wrong, so why would we? Running away would only make us look more suspicious.
If the wizard presumed to be the head of House Lavitas were overwhelmingly powerful like the head of House Aravion, they would have fled for safety. Fortunately, that didn't seem to be the case. Even if the three of them couldn't win in a fight, they could certainly escape if they worked together. Besides, wasn't the bloodline ability of Lavitas more suited for survival rather than combat? It seemed wiser to take some risks here and try to gather information. While the three of them recovered the magic power they had expended during their practice, the two nobles climbing up the mountain met with Aikul, the local caretaker, and exchanged some words. Judging by the way Aikul pointed in their direction, he was likely informing them that there were visitors on the mountain. A short while later, when Rita arrived at their location, Turan was startled by the appearance of the person beside her. The individual possessing such immense magic power was a boy who appeared to be, at most, 16 years old, with a delicate and refined appearance. Similarly, Rita, a woman of House Lavitas with a strikingly youthful face, noticed their presence, waved at Turan, and called out.
Well, if it isn't Turan.
It has been a while, Rita Nim.
What do you mean a while? It's only been 3 or 4 months at most. For someone like me, that's as close as last night.
Rita still spoke like an old woman despite having a youthful face and voice, which was not easy to get used to. At that moment, the boy beside her gave a small, deliberate cough to remind her not to forget about him.
Now that I think about it, this is your first meeting. This here is Turan. Let's see. Where was it again?
I'm from Kalamoth.
Ah, that's right. My memory isn't what it used to be now that I'm old. This is Turan from the northeastern city of Kalamoth. A wandering noble, wasn't it? And this here is Ozel Levitas, my cousin.
Turan.
Ozel gave a low, non-committal hum. As Turan greeted him nonchalantly, pretending not to know his identity, Ozel, who was maintaining a dignified expression, frowned slightly and gave a small nod when Rita nudged his side. It seemed they were also trying to hide the fact that the boy was the head of House Lavitas. As the distance between them closed, Turan immediately heightened his sensitivity to sacred relics and confirmed the emblems residing within their bodies. A pair of clasped silver hands and a staff entwined with 2 white serpents, the symbols of the Purifier bloodline and the Healer bloodline, respectively. The head of House Lavitas didn't have a third bloodline. Seeing this, Turan was able to relax his shoulders somewhat. This meant that the boy in front of him was not possessed by some god, but was simply an exceptionally powerful wizard. How he had accumulated such immense magic power despite that was still a mystery, though. At that moment, Rita glanced at the 2 people standing behind Turan and asked,
Now that I look, you've gained more friends. Would you introduce them?
These 2 go by Sol and Misha. They're in similar circumstances to me, and since our goals align, we've been traveling together.
Sol and Misha, those were the aliases the 2 had decided to use from now on. Considering the purpose of using an alias, it would have been better to choose names entirely different from their real ones. However, since that often led to delayed responses when being called, they had opted for somewhat similar yet still common names.
It's a pleasure to meet you. You must be Rita Nim? We've heard a lot about you from Turan. You are truly beautiful.
Unlike Misa, who simply bowed her head in greeting, Solif shamelessly flattered Rita, acting as if they were already close. Perhaps finding his smooth talk amusing, Rita laughed heartily and waved a hand dismissively.
There's nothing to gain from flattering this old woman. But from what I heard from Aikul, you've been staying here for a few weeks. Did you come to enjoy the hot springs?
Yes. If our presence here is causing any inconvenience, we'll leave immediately.
That's not it. Since it's a gift from nature, whoever uses it owns it. However,
For some reason, Rita looked at them with a slightly worried expression.
do you have a purification magic artifact?
No, we don't.
If you plan to keep using the hot springs, you should each get one. As you know, the hot springs here are often used by monkeys, and those creatures have a nasty habit of relieving themselves while soaking in the water. We don't get sick from it, but still, it's unsettling, isn't it?
Turan and his group froze like ice when Rita casually added that she always used purification magic before entering the hot springs. After shocking them all with this unsettling truth, Rita glanced at Miza's face and suddenly seemed to realize something.
Come to think of it, you were looking for sulfur because you needed an antidote, weren't you? That young lady certainly doesn't look very healthy. But didn't you say she was a noble?
Over the past few days, Miza had been steadily fed meals, and her weight had increased by nearly half. However, by normal standards, she was still terrifyingly underweight. Of course, the fact that she had progressed from looking like a walking corpse to merely appearing as a sickly young lady was already a significant improvement. Since it would be troublesome if they insisted on treating her, Turan cleared his throat lightly and changed the subject.
The sulfur isn't for me, Misha. She's just a bit thin. More importantly, did you and your younger brother come here to enjoy the hot springs?
That's right. I've been ridiculously busy these past few months, so I was in desperate need of a break. Besides, my brother grew up practically confined to the main house since childhood, and rarely had a chance to go out. I thought this would be a good opportunity to introduce him to Aikul as well.
Speaking of which, how old is your brother? He looks quite young on the outside.
At Turan's words, Ozil briefly showed a look of displeasure. It seemed he didn't like being told he looked young. At that moment, Rita grabbed both of Ozil's cheeks and stretched them.
Oh, don't frown like that. If you keep scowling, you'll get wrinkles.
I wish I would, sister. My face already lacks any dignity as it is.
Ozil mumbled with his cheeks still being pulled. The scene was so much like that of an older sister teasing her much younger brother that it was hard to imagine he was possessed by some god. After a moment, Ozil rubbed his cheeks where they had been pinched and then spoke to Turan's group in an arrogant tone.
I turned 132 this year. I may look like this, but to everyone here, I'm old enough to be your father, so speak to me comfortably.
132 years old. That was thrice the age of Solif, the eldest among them. Yet, compared to Rita, he was still incredibly young. Perhaps the claim of being cousins was a lie. Or maybe there had been a significant age gap in their parents' generation. After revealing his age, Ozil seemed to lose interest and began conversing with Aikul. Thanks to that, Turan was finally able to ask Rita the question he had been contemplating.
By the way, has anything unusual happened near Siraf Wetland recently? I heard the South Sea was quite noisy not long ago.
What Turan wanted to know was how House Varaha was searching for Solif. Considering that Solif had last been seen in the South Sea, it was reasonable to suspect that House Lavitas might also be on their list of potential hiding places.
Well, was there anything unusual? Ah, come to think of it, someone from House Varaha in the east did visit recently.
To Turan's surprise, Rita mentioned exactly the information he had been hoping for, as if she had been waiting for him to ask. Seeing Solif visibly flinch, Miza discreetly nudged his side to calm him down.
What business did they have coming from such a distant place?
It seems that the heir of the great noble house betrayed their family and fled. Since there's a high chance they're hiding somewhere in the South Sea archipelago, a bounty has been issued to all noble houses bordering those waters. However, they must not be killed. Capturing them alive is essential so their magic power can be absorbed.
Not just killing, but capturing alive? That's an impossible task for most noble houses.
Even the nobles from House Varaha who had come after Solif possessed enough power to easily wipe out several lesser noble houses. At the very least, it would take more than a dozen houses working together just to kill him. Even then, they would most likely be picked off one by one.
In exchange, anyone who simply reports the location will be rewarded with an advanced magic artifact. And if they successfully capture and deliver him, they will receive nothing less than a sacred relic as a reward. It seems they're even targeting the great noble houses. Are you not interested?
Not particularly. Do they have a portrait or anything like that?
I did receive one, but I haven't looked at it. If you need it, I can get it for you.
No, I was just curious.
As Turan responded, he glanced at Solif. He had assumed that House Varaha would pursue him discreetly, contacting only a few select great noble houses in secret. However, it seemed they had issued an outright public bounty. With things like this, it would be difficult for Solif to show his real face in any region near the South Sea. Should he let Solif use the mask for the time being? This would prevent people from reading his bloodline. But that was a problem that could be managed by briefly removing the mask when necessary. As he was considering this, a thought suddenly crossed Turan's mind, prompting him to ask another question.
By any chance, is there any mention of me?
You? Did you do something?
Well, I did wipe out a pirate crew in the South Sea.
Considering that the pirate crew had actually been a disguised faction of House Varaha, there was a significant chance that they had figured out Turan was the one who had rescued Solif. However, upon hearing this, Rita chuckled in disbelief and shook her head.
There are so many pirates in the South Sea. That kind of rumor wouldn't even reach us. That's something for the lower ranks to deal with.
I see.
In other words, House Varaha had only put a bounty on Solif, not Turan. Did they simply dismiss him as an insignificant bystander unrelated to Solif? If so, that worked in his favor. After all, the only person who truly knew how powerful Turan was would be Tassan of the Red Whale Pirates. As long as Tassan kept quiet, House Varaha would likely assume that Turan was just another wandering noble, and that the capture squad's failure to apprehend Solif was merely an unfortunate coincidence. Of course, the full details could only be uncovered by investigating House Varaha's main estate. However, just knowing that he wasn't on their wanted list was already a significant gain. He should visit the Red Whale Pirates later. He needed to check whether the people on that island had been properly sent back. The route would be a bit inconvenient, but it might be a good idea to visit after stopping by the library. After conversing a little longer, Turan informed Rita and Ozil that they would be taking their leave. Since the two of them planned to stay near the hot springs for the time being, it would be troublesome if they happened to come across a wanted poster with Solif's face on it. Rita seemed somewhat displeased, as if she felt they were chasing Turan's group away, but Ozil looked quite pleased to see the uninvited guests leaving. Regardless, this meeting had led to an important realization. It was highly likely that House Lavatas was not under the influence of a divine being. Instead of immediately flying on BJ, their flying mount, Turan's group moved northwest on foot through the Siraf wetland, dedicating themselves once again to magic training and health recovery. Once Turan judged that Misa had gained enough weight, he moved on to the second phase of her recovery plan.
Come on, push harder.
Misa let out a strained cry, her face flushing red as she struggled to push with her legs. What she was doing was none other than the physical training method that Turan himself had once endured under Haram, his former trainer. It was a regimen that incorporated elements of the techniques Solif had learned from House Varaha, and for this training, Turan and Solif played the role of training equipment. One of them supported her back, while the other firmly pressed down on her legs to provide resistance. As the exhausted Misa gasped for breath, Turan gave a stern order, just as Haram had once done to him.
It's not time to rest yet. One more time.
I'm really exhausted.
It's when you're truly exhausted that one more rep makes a difference. Now, hurry.
Misa's voice broke into another desperate cry as she forced herself through the next repetition. Just as it had been for Turan in the past, this kind of physical training was absolutely grueling, but its effectiveness was undeniable. Due to the natural tendency of noble physiques to strive for an ideal form under the influence of magic power, the moment flesh began to build on her previously skeletal frame, it quickly converted into muscle, strengthening her body. Of course, since her skeletal structure wasn't particularly thick to begin with, she wouldn't be able to develop a robust build like Haram or Solif. However, even reaching the physique of an average adult woman would allow her to utilize her considerable magic power to achieve a respectable level of physical ability. For about 3 to 4 weeks, they continued northward, focusing on Misa's rehabilitation. Eventually, they emerged from the wetland and entered the vast wilderness. As they took in the sight of the western wilderness, which he hadn't seen in quite some time, Turan narrowed his eyes slightly and spoke.
Let's cross this area in one go. I don't feel too comfortable here.
Right. You did mention fighting an army here once.
I did. I left no traces behind, but just in case.
By now, House Baltas's side had likely won the war, but the only way to be certain was to check Orem. Turan's group boarded the swing harness pulled by BJ and soared over the area, looking down at the ground below.
The whole area looks pretty empty.
But considering the number of people traveling around, the war must be over.
Since BJ still remembered the way from their last visit to the library, they were able to reach Orem without getting lost.
Hey, you there. Clean yourself up before coming in.
A guard barked.
Oh, come on, it's not that bad.
The merchant protested.
If you don't want a beating, get lost.
Watching the exchange between the merchant and the city guard, Turan let out a small sigh of relief. The atmosphere in Orem City remained unchanged.
This place is the same as ever,
Turan said.
Really?
Yeah. Looks like they won the war. It's always better when the ruler doesn't change.
After passing through the city gates without any issues, the three of them headed straight for the palace where the lord resided. Previously, when it was just Turan alone, he had sneaked in, but that wasn't an option this time. Unless they planned on breaking in by force, they needed permission to enter. Mesa gazed up at the distant structure.
That's the library?
Yeah.
It's incredibly tall.
It seemed this was Misa's first time seeing Orem's library, and she let out a breath of admiration. Before long, they arrived at the lord's estate, and upon spotting the knight guarding the entrance, Turan waved his hand.
Hey, it's been a while. Your name was?
Oh, my lord. Welcome back.
Since the knight guarding the entrance was the same one Turan had first encountered at the library, there was no need to reveal any magic power. Following his guidance, Turan's group was led inside the lord's manor, where they soon met the new lord of Orem.
A pleasure to meet you. Let's see, Turan, was it? I've heard about you from Marvin.
The new ruler of Orem, Gillen Baltas, was the nephew of the previous lord, Lug, and the older brother of Marvin, a young man Turan had once gone hunting with. He explained that Lug had lost his life near the end of the recent war leading to his succession.
My condolences on the passing of the previous lord.
Thank you. Your words bring me some comfort.
Of course, despite his words, there was not even a hint of sorrow on his face. Turan didn't bother asking about what had become of Isella, the former lord's daughter. Whether she was dead or alive, even showing interest in her could risk displeasing the man before him. Unlike the former lord, who had granted Turan access to the library with little hesitation under the excuse of hunting monkey-type magical beasts, this one demanded payment in exchange for its use. It was likely due to the fief's impoverished state following the war. Since Turan had more than enough gold and silver, he readily handed over a bundle of gold coins to secure access before heading to the library with the others.
Welcome, honored guests.
Here's the permit.
Confirmed. Please enter.
Receiving the knight's polite greeting, Turan stepped inside. The moment the doors closed behind him, he raised his voice and called out to the librarian. From experience, he knew that sound did not carry outside from within, so there was no need to hold back.
I'm here, Elder.
It seems I can't see it,
Misa said, glancing around.
Same here. Damn, what a shame. To meet an ancient spirit and not be able to see or hear it.
As expected, Solif, with his deep interest in ancient stories, seemed particularly disappointed. Turan shook his head in response to their expectant looks.
No, I can't see him either right now. He must have gone upstairs for a moment.
The librarian was always on the first floor, so perhaps he had found something to research. Turan's group waited on the first floor of the library for a few minutes, but the librarian did not appear.
Elder?
Turan's voice echoed emptily through the vast library.